In the village of EJE, tucked between rolling hills and vast stretches of fertile farmland, a boy named EJE was born into a family that honored tradition above all else. The people of EJE were known for their strength and resilience, living peacefully but always prepared for the challenges of life. From a young age, EJE was raised under the strict guidance of his father, a respected elder and warrior who had survived many battles defending their homeland. EJE learned early the importance of discipline, both in body and in mind. While other boys played, EJE trained. His father taught him how to wield a spear, how to outthink his opponents, and most importantly, how to endure. The teachings of their ancestors emphasized that a warrior must master his own body before he could defeat others. It was then that EJE took on his first trial, the vow not to consume food prepared the night before or drink water when the sun had set. This self-imposed test would come to define him as a man of unmatched willpower. The community noticed his quiet intensity, the way he pushed himself beyond the limits of ordinary men. As he grew, so too did his reputation. By the time he reached adulthood, EJE had become the strongest and most respected warrior in all of EJE. His name was spoken with admiration and awe, and people believed that under his protection, their village would remain safe from any external threats. Yet, peace was fragile, and soon, the rumblings of war would reach their borders. It began as whispers, rumors that echoed through the marketplace, passed from travelers who spoke of a powerful kingdom to the west that was expanding its reach. This kingdom had a dark ambition. They enslaved entire communities, raiding villages, and turning their people into laborers to build an empire of immense wealth. The elders of EJE were concerned, though some dismissed the threat as distant. After all, EJE had never been conquered. They had fertile land, skilled warriors, and their people were resourceful. But EJE, always vigilant, could not shake the feeling that these whispers were more than rumors. He had heard similar tales before, the stories of villages that did not prepare for war, only to be wiped from existence when the slavers arrived at their doors. EJE approached the council, urging them to take action, but his warnings were met with caution. They were hesitant to mobilize, fearing that doing so would incite war before it was necessary. Yet, despite the council's reluctance, EJE began training the village's warriors in secret. He knew that if the threat became real, they would need every advantage they could muster. Days turned into weeks, and the signs of impending conflict became harder to ignore. A scout reported seeing strangers near the outskirts of their lands, and several neighboring villages had gone silent. Tension gripped EJE, and the peaceful life they had always known was on the verge of collapse. EJE was one of the first people EJE turned to for help in organizing the village's defense. He was not a warrior, but he was a man of immense resourcefulness. A farmer by trade, EJE knew the land better than anyone, and his crops fed many of the families in EJE, including EJE's own. The two men had been friends for years, sharing a mutual respect for one another's skills. EJE admired EJE's strength and resolve, while EJE valued EJE's wisdom and practicality. Despite their different roles in the village, they were united by a common goal: to protect their people. EJE would often bring food to EJE and his warriors as they trained. He respected EJE's strict adherence to his vow not to eat food that had been left overnight, never questioning the ritual that seemed so strange to others. To EJE, it was a mark of EJE's character, his unbreakable will, which had carried him through countless challenges, but EJE harbored a secret, one that would eventually bring devastation to them all. EJE worked tirelessly to prepare the village for the inevitable. He divided the able-bodied men into small units, training them day and night. The women, too, played a crucial role. They prepared food, crafted weapons, and tended to the wounded as EJE's warriors engaged in grueling exercises to strengthen their bodies and minds. Among these women was Uduma, EJE's wife. Uduma was beautiful, proud, and fiercely independent. She was unlike any other woman in the village, and her marriage to EJE had been the talk of EJE for months when it first happened. At the time, they seemed like a perfect pair, two strong-willed individuals united by their love for their people and their desire for a prosperous future, but as the threat of war loomed, their relationship began to strain. EJE's focus shifted entirely toward defending the village. Every waking moment was spent planning, training, and strategizing. While Uduma supported her husband, she could not help but feel increasingly isolated. Her dreams of a peaceful life, of raising children and living in comfort, seemed to slip further away with each passing day. The first attack came under the cover of night, when most of the village was asleep. The enemy had moved silently, their faces hidden behind dark cloaks, their weapons gleaming in the faint moonlight. EJE had anticipated such an attack, and his warriors were ready with a fierce battle cry. EJE led the charge. The clash of steel echoed through the village as EJE's defenders fought to repel the invaders. EJE fought like a man possessed, his spear flashing in the darkness, cutting down enemy after enemy. The attackers, though skilled, were no match for his strength and strategy. By dawn, the slavers were driven back, retreating into the forest, leaving behind the bodies of their fallen, but the victory was bittersweet. Several of EJE's warriors had been killed, and the village had suffered its first real taste of war. Worse still, EJE had begun to suspect that the enemy had help from within. How else could they have known the weak points in their defenses? How else could they have mounted such a coordinated attack? There was a traitor in EJE, and EJE vowed to uncover who it was. In the days that followed the attack, EJE grew more distant. His suspicions about a traitor gnawed at him, and he threw himself even more deeply into his role as protector of the village. His relationship with Uduma began to deteriorate. The once passionate love they had shared was replaced by cold silence. Uduma, who had always been proud of her husband's strength, now saw it as a curse. She missed the man she had married, the one who spoke of dreams and hope, not of battle and death. She tried to reach out to him, to rekindle the bond they once had, but EJE was consumed by his mission. He barely had time for her, and when he did, his mind was elsewhere. Uduma's frustration grew, and she began to wonder if this life of constant war was all that awaited her. She had once admired EJE's devotion to his people, but now she resented it. She felt trapped in a marriage that offered no future, no peace. Unbeknownst to EJE, Uduma's thoughts were turning darker. She began to question whether his path was the right one, and whether there might be another way, one that didn't involve endless bloodshed. As the village prepared for what they knew would be a long and difficult war, EJE made a startling discovery. One night, while patrolling the outskirts of the village, he caught sight of Ode meeting with a group of men in the shadows. EJE's heart sank as he realized what was happening. Ode, his oldest friend, was betraying them. EJE confronted Ode, demanding an explanation. The farmer, his face pale with guilt, confessed. He had been providing food and information to the enemy, hoping that by doing so, he could spare himself and his family from the horrors of slavery. But as the words tumbled from Ode's mouth, the real horror of the situation became clear. Ode had not acted alone. Uduma, EJE's own wife, had been conspiring with the enemy from the beginning. She had grown tired of the endless fighting, of EJE's obsession with defending the village. In secret, she had reached out to the slavers, offering them aid in exchange for a promise of safety and power. Once EJE fell, EJE was stunned. The woman he had loved, the woman he had fought for, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. The war dragged on for 10 long years. Despite the betrayal of his wife and friend, EJE continued to lead the village in its defense against the slavers. His strength and resolve never wavered, and he became a living legend among his people. His refusal to eat food prepared overnight or drink water after sunset became a symbol of his iron will and unbreakable spirit, but the toll of the war was heavy. Many of EJE's finest warriors had fallen, and the village was slowly crumbling under the weight of constant battle. The people looked to EJE for hope, but even he could not hold back the tide of despair that was creeping into their hearts. Uduma, now fully entrenched in her alliance with the enemy, watched from the shadows. She had gained the power she had sought, but at a terrible cost. She no longer felt any joy in her victory. The village she had once loved was in ruins, and the man she had once adored was now a stranger to her. Uduma had once dreamed of a life of comfort and prosperity. She had imagined herself ruling alongside the enemy, enjoying the spoils of war while the people of EJE toiled under their new masters. But the reality of her choices was far grimmer. The enemy did not see her as an equal, only as a tool to be used and discarded when convenient. They made promises, but they never intended to keep them. The power she had craved was an illusion, and she found herself more isolated than ever. The people of EJE, though they did not know the full extent of her betrayal, sensed that something was wrong. They whispered about her in the streets, and she could feel their hatred growing. Even the slavers who had once promised her the world now regarded her with disdain. Uduma's ambitions had led her down a path of destruction, and there was no turning back. Ode, racked with guilt over his role in the betrayal, decided that he could no longer live with his shame. He sought out EJE, hoping to confess everything and beg for forgiveness. But Uduma, sensing the danger, acted swiftly. Before Ode could speak to EJE, she poisoned him. Ode died a slow, agonizing death, his secret buried with him. EJE, unaware of the full extent of Uduma's treachery, mourned the loss of his friend, believing that Ode had simply been a victim of the war. But deep down, EJE knew that something was still wrong. He could feel the weight of the lies that surrounded him, and he vowed to uncover the truth. No matter the cost, the enemy launched their final assault on EJE with overwhelming force. The village, weakened by years of war, was no match for the sheer number of invaders. EJE, despite his incredible strength and skill, could not hold back the tide alone. As the battle raged around him, EJE fought with everything he had. His spear cut through the enemy ranks, but for every slaver he killed, 2 more took their place. The village walls began to crumble, and the people of EJE, once so full of hope, were now facing certain defeat. In the chaos, EJE caught sight of Uduma standing on a hill, watching the battle unfold. She was dressed in the fine clothes of the enemy, her face cold and emotionless. EJE's heart broke as he realized that the woman he had loved was truly gone. In a moment of clarity, EJE understood the full extent of Uduma's betrayal. She had not only conspired with the enemy, but she had actively worked to ensure the fall of EJE. The final blow came when Uduma raised her hand, signaling to the enemy forces to close in on EJE. With Uduma's signal, the enemy forces swarmed EJE. He fought valiantly, but he was overwhelmed. The people of EJE, seeing their leader fall, lost all hope. The village walls were breached, and the enemy poured in, capturing the remaining villagers and enslaving them. As EJE was dragged to the ground, his eyes locked with Uduma's. In that moment, he saw not anger or hatred, but sorrow. It was the look of someone who had lost everything, just as he had. But there was no redemption for her now. Uduma, standing beside her new masters, watched as EJE was bound and taken away. The village of EJE was no more, and its people were now slaves. EJE was taken to the enemy's camp, where he was held captive. His body was broken, but his spirit remained unyielding. Even in chains, he refused to bow to his captors. He spent his days in silent contemplation, reflecting on the choices he had made and the people he had lost. He thought of Ode, his once loyal friend, and the betrayal that had shattered their bond. He thought of Uduma, the woman he had loved, and the choices she had made that had led to their downfall. But most of all, he thought of the people of EJE, now enslaved because of his failure to protect them. Uduma, now living in the enemy's camp, began to realize the true cost of her betrayal. She had gained nothing from her alliance with the slavers. They did not respect her, and the people of EJE despised her. She was alone, with no one to turn to. Her dreams of power and wealth had turned to ashes, and she was left with nothing but regret. She tried to speak to EJE, to apologize for what she had done, but he refused to see her. She had destroyed everything they had built together, and there was no forgiveness to be found. EJE's execution was swift and brutal. The enemy, seeking to make an example of him, paraded him before the enslaved villagers before taking his life. EJE met his fate with dignity, his eyes never leaving Uduma, who stood among the crowd. As the blade fell, EJE's final thought was of the people of EJE. Though he had failed to save them, he knew that his spirit would live on in their hearts. His refusal to bend, even in death, would become a symbol of resistance for future generations. Uduma watched as her husband was executed, the weight of her betrayal crushing her. She had gained nothing and lost everything. And so, the village of EJE fell, but the memory of EJE, the warrior who had fought for his people until the very end, would live on forever. Years later, the story of EJE became a legend, to be passed down from generation to generation. But something happened. The people of EJE, though enslaved, kept his memory alive, and his story inspired others to rise up against their oppressors. EJE's legacy was not one of defeat, but of unyielding resistance, even in the face of betrayal. As for Uduma, she lived out the rest of her days in sorrow and regret, forever haunted by the choices she had made and the love she had destroyed. In the end, EJE's spirit remained unbroken, a testament to the power of loyalty, honor, and sacrifice.